Peace be with you. Welcome to the Institute of All Intelligent Life. My name is Alan Kiesler, and this is our third class. It is Wednesday, the 28th of September, 2016. So, for those of you who came on earlier, we've already done the breathing exercise. So anybody who missed that, if you just come on now, kindly, you can go to that other live chat that was just 5 minutes ago, and you can do the breathing with us there. Otherwise, we're going to just pause a minute here, let a few more people, we have 10 people watching right now, so I'm just going to wait another minute and start the class as soon as a few more people have gathered. So I just want to remind everyone that this subtle energies of the body that we generally are unaware of in terms of Western science and education is something very important. So we've already done the breathing, and now I'm going to do a little bit of the subtle energy work. This rubbing your hands like this was taught to me about 20 years ago when I was in Mauritius. A great, he was actually the, what is it called now? It's like in America we have a Surgeon General. In Mauritius he was the Chief Medical Officer. The Chief Medical Officer of Mauritius. It's the highest position of a medical personality, a doctor advising the government. And it's like the rank of an ambassador. So he was a very fine gentleman, and he taught me some things. I'm going to teach you one or two of the things he taught me. One is rubbing your hands very vigorously like that. You'll feel them get warm, and it makes it easier to feel the energies. And you can also, you can put it over your eyes, actually. That brings the energy into your body. Just by, this is what he taught me, to bring the energy into your body. Like that. So becoming aware of these subtle energies is very, very important, because if we're not aware of them, we will actually miss out on so many things, including what the main purpose of this course is to become aware of not only extraterrestrials in our dimension, or our density of existence, but other dimensions and other densities, which is what we're going to be talking about more today. So I just want to go straight into this rather than taking questions right now, because this is a very, very deep, important topic, and it is really, you could say, the goal of human life. The goal of human life is to enter into the trans-dimensional existence. So that's our personal goal. We also have many other goals. In this lifetime we have purposes and goals, of which achieving peace, not only individual peace, but social peace, political peace, international peace. This is also our goal and our purpose. But ultimately, to enter into trans-dimensional existence, which is our real home. So that's what I want to talk about now. I mentioned yesterday the Urantia book. So much of this information that I'm getting right now, I'm going to be giving you right now, is coming from the Urantia book, and also from my own experience. As I mentioned yesterday, in 2004, I had a very wonderful experience meeting with Robert Monroe, Bob Monroe, who started the Monroe Institute, which I would advise you all to visit also online, Monroe Institute. Robert Monroe, you can do a search for him. So he was the most famous person back in the 1970s, I guess, maybe even 60s, but he became very popular in the United States because he taught people. He was the first person to really talk about traveling out of the body, and he had many, many followers who he taught how to do this also. So I also benefited from his teachings and learned how to travel out of the body, although I had really been doing it before also, but I really didn't understand what I was doing until I studied with him, or with his institution. So we're now going to talk about trans-dimensional existence, and as I mentioned yesterday, there is a barrier between this dimensional existence, we can call it, this world that we're living in, which has many, many dimensions also, and the transdimensional existence. So that barrier is generally considered impassable. Just like Robert Monroe himself, he wrote about it in his books. He could not get through that barrier, which he reached as he traveled. As far as he could travel out, he found this barrier. So that barrier can be penetrated, but it requires a proper mood, a conscious endeavor. And some of the very important aspects of that mood are humility and devotion, or we could say love. Love is the most important feeling or reality of all, in every aspect. Love of humanity, love of creation, love of animals and plants, love of the whole universe, and ultimately love of God. So when that love is cultivated, along with it naturally comes humility and compassion and kindness, forgiveness. When these moods, these spiritual emotions, you could call them, are cultivated, then that enables us to enter into the transdimensional existence. So as I mentioned yesterday, when Robert Monroe and I passed through that barrier and entered into the transdimensional existence, it was very beautiful. Immediately what we saw was uncountable numbers of beautiful, glowing or shining spheres or globes or worlds. It's kind of hard to use one word to describe them, but they just looked absolutely beautiful, radiant, shining. It's hard to describe the color. It was a mixture of golden and whitish and yellowish, and maybe there was pink and green. Anyway, but they were all effulgent, radiant. So as I mentioned, Robert, or Bob as I called him, he immediately took off. He just went like that. And he just left me even without so much as saying a word. He just was, I guess he sort of indicated he was going, but he just immediately took off. He wanted to investigate because he'd never been there before. So what I want to do now is describe that transdimensional existence as described in the Urantia book. And again, let me repeat that ultimate world, that is actually our eternal home, that world is actually eternal. It never was created, and it never will end. This world that we live in was created, and it will have an ending. It may be recreated again and again, but we know that it had a beginning and it will have an end. But the transdimensional existence never had a beginning, and it will never have an end. This is how it's described in the Urantia book. And there it says there are actually, the number is given of 1 billion, which I think means, because in the American counting system, a billion means 1,000 million, although in the European system, it's a larger number than that. But anyway, it doesn't matter very much. It's far, far more than we could ever explore or imagine, or I guess we could, since we have unlimited time, we could explore them all. But it's just too much for us to even imagine now. For us, it's like an unlimited number. So each of those globes or spheres or worlds, shining, radiant worlds, which are self-luminous, they are presided over by a great personality. So some people might consider that to be God, because those beings are so practically unlimitedly powerful and unlimitedly conscious, aware of everything. They understand perfectly everyone's heart who's residing in their abode or in their planet or in their sphere. But they are not the original God. There has been a great mistake that humanity has made over thousands of years, recognizing that there are superior beings, but failing to realize that there is only one being worthy of ultimate worship, one supreme, absolute source of everything else. So this was the great contribution of the Holy Prophet of Islam, Hazrat Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He made it very, very clear, La ilaha illallah. There is only one supreme God. And people who were worshipping many different gods, people were worshipping, for example, the sun, the moon, stars, because they actually are personalities also. This is something that we're not taught in Western universities or colleges or schools, but extraterrestrials are well aware of this, that just like we have a body and we have a consciousness, so the bodies, like the earth also, the moon, the sun, the different stars, all different heavenly bodies, they are the bodies of great personalities, great powerful advanced personalities who are far superior to us in many ways. Some ways we may be superior to them too, but generally they were considered very powerful and were worshipped by people in ancient times. So there are great beings in the transdimensional existence also, who may be, much more worshipable or powerful than the stars or the sun or moon. But they are also not the supreme absolute truth source of everything else. That being, who is sometimes called intelligent infinity, that's the name that's given in the Law of One books, which I am also going to be using a great deal in this course. So that intelligent infinity is, although it's difficult, very difficult for us to understand these things because our minds are so limited, our training is so limited, our ability to understand things is very, very limited. The quick way, the perfect way to learn is to just come in contact with somebody who knows and accept what they teach. That is the fast, easy way to learn something. Just like if you want to learn physics or mathematics or any subject, if you find a teacher or a professor who knows that subject thoroughly, you can very quickly learn it from them. But if you try to figure it out on your own, it's going to take a long, long time. So just like Robert Monroe was one of those people who liked to figure out things on his own. So that's okay, that's good. But other people are willing to just accept information from somebody who they trust, who they have faith in that they're going to give me good information. And if we accept that information, we can learn an awful lot very quickly. And then we can confirm that information as time passes, as we become qualified also to directly experience it. So, although, again, this source, as I've said before, is mixed, there is some information in the Urantia book that I am convinced is correct. There's other information that I'm very suspicious of, but it's a mixed collection of different writings by different personalities, all published together in one book. But this description of the transdimensional existence, I'm convinced, is quite accurate, for the most part at least. And it gives the exact number of 1 billion. I don't know if that's exactly correct, but it gives us an idea of a huge number of these transcendental, transdimensional spheres or worlds that are radiant. But, and this is the important point, there is one central paradise, is the word that's used in the Urantia book, the isle or island of paradise, which is at the center of all of those radiant, glowing, shining worlds in the transdimensional existence. And that region is described in the Urantia book as not being a sphere, but having a top and a bottom, not being completely flat, but sort of flattened out, maybe like a pancake or a chapati, a kind of thick chapati, more like a pancake, which is said to be 10 times as wide from east to west as it is up and down. So it's kind of flattish. And it also has a slightly oblong or ellipsoid shape. It's not a perfect circle from viewing it from the top. It's slightly longer, about a ratio of 6 to 5, I believe, of north to south as east to west. And how is north and south determined? Because the energies which emanate from that central isle they go out of the north side, the north end. So that creates a direction. And the energies circulate. All energies circulate. So even the original energy coming out from the central Isle of Paradise, it goes out from the north end and comes in the south. So that creates an absolute direction. Sometimes modern science usually either is puzzled about whether there is an absolute direction or not, or they deny there is any such thing as an absolute direction. But according to the Urantia book, there is an absolute direction, which is determined by this slightly oblong shape of the central Isle of Paradise. And the top part of the isle is the actual residence of God. God has a place where God resides. And it has an underside, which is the source of energy, I guess, or the source of, well, it's hard to describe, but it's impersonal or non-personal. Whereas the top side of the Isle of Paradise has activities, and that's where God personally engages in his eternal activities in his own abode. So this world that we're living in is far, far away from that central isle. The shining worlds of the transdimensional existence fill up a huge space. I don't think it's possible for us to really comprehend that space. But on the other side, you might say, well, because it's hard to describe these things in our terms, or terms that we can understand with our minds, because our minds, again, are very limited. We think in terms of space and time, but the transdimensional existence is transdimensional. It's beyond any dimensions. It's beyond up and down and east and west and north and south as we experience them. And it's beyond time. There is no time there. So that may be puzzling to some of you if you think, well, if there's no time, then how can things be happening? Things happen, but there's no passing away. In other words, time for us means things grow old, things deteriorate, things die, things fall apart. So although things happen in the transdimensional existence, they don't deteriorate. And in fact, even this is to some extent possible in this world also, because our image of time, as I've written something about this on the Institute of All Intelligent Life website, the allintelligentlife.com website, I've written something about time there also, which you can read that for further explanation. But very simply, time is not what we usually think of it as a stream, a single river of time. But you can go back and forth in time. And as I mentioned, Andrew Basiago yesterday, who has done teleportation himself and who is running for President of the United States right now, please do visit his websites too, look him up. Andrew Basiago also did time travel. And if you go to his website, you can get the full information about that. So it's possible to go backwards and forwards in time, although it's very tricky and very problematic, because you can create different timelines which can conflict with other timelines. So time is really much more complex than we usually think of it. But, and this is an important point, things here deteriorate. They get old, they die, things wear out, they fall apart. But in the transdimensional existence, things don't deteriorate. So virtually you can go anywhere in terms of time, as well as in terms of space. But that space, again, is like the time there is different than the time here. The space there is different than the space here. So again, to return to the Urantia book's description a little bit, there is an upper portion and a lower portion of paradise, and there's an intermediate portion also. The intermediate portion, the Urantia book itself, the author describing that, says it's very, very difficult for him to understand anything at all about it. But there are those three sections. And this central isle is huge. It's, for all purposes, it's unlimited as far as we can imagine, as far as our brains could comprehend. Although it does have a periphery. It does have an edge, and it is possible to go there and to reach there. And in fact, that's what we all ultimately are striving for, is to return back to God, who is the source of everything. So this is a quick description of the transdimensional existence. I mentioned yesterday the shining worlds that Robert Monroe and I saw. There's also this central aisle, which is a great mystery in many ways. It's very, very difficult for us to understand it, but we should know, and this is probably the most important thing I can teach in this whole course in terms of cosmology. We should know for a fact that the central Isle of Paradise is there. It does exist. It has a real existence. It's not some spiritual place in the sense of being a vacuum or a void or something that we can't see. We can't see with our current eyes, definitely, but the soul also has vision, and that central Isle of Paradise and everything that's going on there can be seen. And one day, inshallah, we will go there. So that's something that we should aspire for. So now we can get back to a little bit of the class that I was giving about history, because I was talking about the moon yesterday and the solar system. So although life on our planet has been existing for a long, long time, about 2 billion or 2.6 billion years, there have been intelligent beings living on this. Before that, there were simple forms of life, animals or plants, you might say, fish. But human life, intelligent human life, evidently came to our planet about 2.6 billion years ago. And that was a very advanced race. And highly spiritual, we would say, highly advanced compared to ourselves. But the most important thing that I want to focus on now is the moon, because the moon, as I mentioned yesterday, is not what we think it is. The moon is not, as our scientists have taught us, and they still teach us, even though they know better now from their own experiments they did, as I mentioned yesterday. The moon is considered just some solid thing that maybe came out of the Pacific Ocean or something like that. But if that had been the case, then why, when NASA did that experiment I mentioned yesterday and crashed a craft into the surface of the moon after having put sensors on it, the moon reverberated. It rang like a bell. And so then they learned it was hollow. And we have learned from people like Corey Goode, probably the most important whistleblower from the secret space programs. Let me spell his name so you can do research on him also. Corey, C-O-R-E-Y, Goode, G-O-O-D-E. So Corey Goode has been one of the main persons who have revealed about what's going on the moon. He's been there. He's been to Mars. He's traveled out in space. And he has done research on a research vessel for many years. And he was the one who gave this information about huge areas on the moon. A little bit is visible actually and has been seen, but has been like airbrushed out of the NASA photographs on the surface. There are huge structures on the moon. Some of them are 2 or 3 miles tall even, and they have been seen by Russian as well as American craft have photographed them, but they've been kept secret from us. But those are minimal on the surface compared to what's underneath the surface, where there are hundreds and thousands of bases, both what we might call military bases as well as what we may call research laboratories underneath the surface of the moon. And there are many, many floors, the many, many levels, maybe even hundreds of levels, because I believe, I can't remember the exact figure that Corey Goode had given, but it's maybe even 50 miles or more than that of solid, maybe not solid, but many, many structures are underneath the surface of the moon. So what was very interesting was that the moon's surface seems to be older than the Earth's. which didn't make sense at all in terms of the old theories about the moon having broken off from the Earth. So what we have learned now from these extraterrestrial sources, through the secret space program whistleblowers mainly, is that the moon was brought here. It was put here by very powerful, intelligent extraterrestrials. And it had a purpose, more or less, or one of the purposes was to monitor the Earth. And one proof of this is that moons are always much smaller than the planets they circle. This is just a physical fact. It has to do with the way moons are created generally. You can look at Mars, for example. Mars has 2 moons. They're tiny. Jupiter and Saturn, which are huge, they have moons, but they're all smaller than our moon. Or if they're bigger, they're not very much bigger. But our moon is, relatively, it's in the same order of magnitude as our Earth. So the moon is so big compared to the Earth. And there are many fascinating things about the moon, and this is actually shocking if you stop and think about it. How could the moon have been so perfectly positioned that the moon looks exactly the same size as the sun? Quite apart from the fact that the moon is much too big to be an ordinary moon of a planet the size of our Earth, it looks exactly the same size as the sun. So that when there's an eclipse, it completely blocks the sun, or depending on how near and how far the moon may be at that particular moment, the edge of the sun may be just barely visible around the moon, or the moon may completely block the sun. So how come the moon is exactly the same size as we view it as the sun? Well, what's even more shocking, and this I only learned 2 or 3 years ago, and when I found out I was amazed. Why did I never know this before? But I learned this when I went to a program to make cob houses, make mud houses, you can say. My son and I learned how to make mud houses. So they are very expert, of course, in designing homes in such a way that the heat of the sun will be minimized during the hot summer, because it's fairly hot in California in the summer, and you can maximize the heat you get during the winter. So in order to do that, they have to know exactly what the path of the sun is. Well, we learned in that cob house building workshop, actually it went on for quite a few days, that the orbit of the moon is exactly opposite the orbit of the sun. In other words, the path that the sun follows during the summer, which of course in the summer the sun is higher on the horizon, and in the winter it's lower on the horizon, just the opposite on the southern hemisphere. Well, winter is opposite of summer there, but here in the northern hemisphere, during the months of June and July and August, the sun is hotter and it's higher in the sky. And during the winter months, which here in the northern hemisphere means in December, November, December, January, February, the sun is colder and it's lower on the horizon. But the moon is just the opposite. The moon during the summer is lower on the horizon, and the moon during the winter is higher above the horizon. And this is totally impossible for me to explain how this could have happened naturally without it being perfectly placed. The moon follows the exact same path that the sun follows 6 months away. Think about that a second. Is that possible to that have happened if the moon just burst out of the Pacific Ocean and happened to get caught by the Earth's gravity and was circling around the Earth? No, that's totally impossible. So the moon was actually put in orbit by intelligent, very powerful beings who certainly were extraterrestrials. You may want to call them angels, you may want to call them jinn, you may want to call them whatever you want, but they definitely were very powerful enough to be able to bring the moon into position and put it in an orbit around the Earth such that it would perfectly block out the sun during an eclipse and such that it would exactly follow the opposite path of the sun during the 6 months of the year. So I'm going to conclude the class now. Our time is about up, and I will take more questions tomorrow. I want to explain to you that this exercises I've been doing is optional. You can do it or not, whether you like or not. So as I started this class, for those of you who happened to come on earlier, I began some breathing exercises before beginning the class, and similarly I'm going to have the exercises after I end the class. So I'm going to end the class now, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Again, we will do breathing before 6:30, and we will do the yoga exercises, or the different exercises that include some yoga positions and some positions that I have introduced into this practice that I had learned after the class. So thank you all very, very much. I hope this information is helpful to you, and I hope you will meditate and pray about this information, and if it resonates with you in your heart, then you can be sure that it's true. It resonates in my heart. That's how I came to accept it and agreed to transmit the same knowledge to others, because I think this is very, very important information, and I hope you agree. So I look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning, and may God protect us all.